Hey, welcome to Hey Pastor, have you seen this? And what we're doing here is just getting my reactions to videos that friends of mine see on the internet, on TikTok, YouTube shorts that bring up stuff like big questions, philosophical questions, questions about the Bible, questions about God, questions about Jesus, and just get my reaction from it from a pastor's or a Christian perspective. So that's what we're doing. We're having fun with it. And just so you know, I have not seen this. So it's my staff of intrepid explorers who are looking around the internet for all the fun and controversial stuff to throw at Rick to see what he has to say about it. So I don't claim to be have all the answers or whatever, but hopefully my perspective on some of this stuff will give you a sense of maybe a Christian response to some popular stuff that makes its way around the internet. And by the way, if you have one of these, maybe you have your own little TikTok video or some YouTube short or something that brought up a provocative issue that has to do with Christianity or the Bible or church or something, send it to me and I'd love to react to it. So that would be at social@ac3.org. All right. So without further ado, let's look into the first video that my team has asked me to respond to. Hey, Pastor, have you seen this?
You're gonna hate me. It's fine, whatever. I asked a question last.
No, I'm not going to hate you. I mean, I don't hate anybody. We're really called to love our enemies. So right out of the gate, although the voice there, just slightly annoying, but other than that, I love you, sister. So let's see what she has to say.
I said, Christians, please tell me, why did God punish Adam and Eve for eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil when they would not have known that eating that fruit was wrong until they ate the fruit? Because
Well, I think maybe we have a false premise already right out of the gate. I mean, the tree was very explicitly set in the middle of the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve to not eat. So it was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the way it's framed is like this: of any tree of the in the garden you may freely eat, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you must not eat. And so there's probably a sense in which they don't know fully what's going to happen because it is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and probably something that they don't have because they're innocent. But what they do have is a restriction from God and the call to trust God. There's so immediately what you have in the middle of the garden is God putting free choice in front of his innocent new image bearers, Adam and Eve. But you also have the call for them to trust. So they have the freedom of choice and they also have trust, which are just massive when it comes to relationship with God, which is the central part of the central story of the Bible overall.
that's what that tree did. It gave you knowledge of badness, which they would not have had until they ate the fruit. Nobody answered me there, but it's fine because I've got another question. So I want to know.
Okay, so she has another question, but I guess maybe just to wrap that up. Yes, they didn't know the knowledge of good. In fact, the devil told them that. And so when the serpent tempts Eve, he actually tells her, your eyes will be open. And he was right about that. And this is, of course, underlines the essential nature of all temptation, that there's an essential truth in almost every lie that we're told by spiritual evil. So yes, they would have their eyes opened, but that doesn't mean that what's being implied by her is that they weren't armed by God with enough knowledge to know that they should avoid it. And that's not true. Of any tree of the knowledge in the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you must not eat. They understood by this two things: that they were free, but that they were being called to trust God, that this was going to be the best for them. And as we all know, they didn't follow.
Why didn't God want them to have knowledge of good and evil? Because knowing the difference between good and evil would not have made them sinful. It would have just given them definition to evil that already existed outside of themselves before they entered the scene. Unless if God.
So I think that in the absolute sense that they did not know what evil was. Yes, they did not have knowledge of good and evil. But what they had was, they had God's good guideline outlined for them. And as God was their father, their source, their call to trust God and this limit that he had put up was its own definition of evil. So they didn't know what evil was, in the sense that they didn't know what it was to, be selfish and to violate relationship with themselves, with God, with the environment. They didn't know any of that stuff because they were living in uninterrupted fellowship with God. But the line itself that God draws in the sand sets them up to understand that what's on the other side of this, they don't want, if they trust God. So for them, that is the definition of evil. The definition of evil is simply disobedience, to disobey the clear line that God had marked out for them, even though they don't understand what that all means.
I didn't want them to know that he's actually the evil one. I mean, it makes sense. Look at what he did in the Bible. Satan did hardly anything wrong. He's just telling them, like, hi, I'm just being myself. And God's like, oh, like, what if Christians have been worshiping the bad guy all along?
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. So there's a sense in which Satan's ploy with Adam and Eve is we're very sympathetic to it, because what he's appealing to is not just the knowledge of good and evil. How can knowledge be a bad thing, right? More knowledge. How can knowledge be a bad thing? But again, in the context of God has set them up in this pristine environment, he's surrounded them with his love, and that is expressed in this environment that is rich and lush, and that's expressed in the idea of any tree in the garden you may freely eat. It's just a beautiful and free environment. But one restriction, and one restriction only. And Satan says one restriction is one restriction too many. And he says, in the day you eat of it, he knows that you will be like God and your eyes will be open. So the temptation is to be God's, to be able to get a good, but around God's limits. So yes, knowledge, she's absolutely right. Knowledge is an objective good, and for them to gain knowledge would have been an objective good, except as they went around God's good limits. And then that defines sin all the way up to today. So when people are tempted even today, they aren't tempted because they love badness. People are tempted to do bad things because they love goodness, but they don't want to be constricted around God's good limits. So, for example, sex is an objective good, but God has set it up to function in a certain way. But we want to achieve the pleasure of it and the goodness of it, but around God's good limitations. And so, yes, if you want to look at the freedom program of Satan as an absolute autonomy type thing, then yeah, Satan is the good guy in the story, because what he wants for Adam and Eve is absolute autonomy, not just to pursue good, but to pursue good their own way, even if it's through violating God's good limits. And so, yeah, I mean, it's fascinating that she says that Satan's the good guy in the story, because, in our highly autonomous, independent world, Satan looks like the good guy. He just wants to give them knowledge and get them to do it their own way, to gain a good, in this case, knowledge of good and evil, but to do it around God's limits. We don't want to be limited. And oh, friend, that just gets us to the darkness in us, that we don't want to have any constraints on our gusto, even if it means cutting off our own long-term happiness and goodness, which is what God was interested in. And you see that by the end of the story.
The Bible says, you will know a tree by its fruits. And then you ignore the fruits of God in the Bible. Hello? He's not a good guy.
Yeah, so I just disagree, and for that reason. So God is the good guy because God has set up long-term pleasure. He always, this is what defines wisdom, and this is what defines morality, it's the longest term pleasure, it's the longest term goods. And what defines evil almost always, it's the shortest term goods and the shortest term pleasures. And so yes, Satan has a good that he sets in front of Adam and Eve, and the good is knowledge. And knowledge is not intrinsically evil, but it becomes evil as it tries to skirt around God's good limit. And God's good limit, as we see, is about blessing Adam and Eve for the long term. And so everything that God says comes to pass, that the long-term consequence, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. And they die spiritually, and later they will die physically, and they bring horror and fall onto themselves, their relationship with each other, on their relationship with God, and their relationship with their environment, with the planet. So Yeah, we're going to have to disagree on whether that Satan is the good guy in this story, because Satan is not interested in our longest term happiness and payout. And following God always requires that we surrender and trust his good way, even if we don't understand. All right, so if you have your own reaction video that you want to get Rick's cold read on, I would be happy to do that. So send it to social@ac3.org. And until next time, we'll see you on Hey Pastor, have you seen this?